Life often presents unexpected challenges, but nothing could have prepared Sarah for the ordeal she would face after marrying Andrew. At 28 years old, she thought she was stepping into the life she had always dreamed of, a life filled with love, partnership, and security. However, her dreams quickly turned into a nightmare when she moved into her in-laws' house. From the very first meeting with her mother-in-law, Emily, things were tense. Emily made it clear that Sarah would not just be Andrew's wife, but would have to manage all household chores for the family. When Sarah learned they were expected to live with his parents permanently, she was shocked, but her love for Andrew made her agree. She hoped to make the best of it, despite her instincts screaming at her to reconsider. Little did she know, this was just the beginning of a long battle against the oppressive control of her mother-in-law. Sarah's heart sank further when she was handed a uniform upon moving in: white shirts, black pants, and a frilly apron. "From now on, you'll handle all the housework," her mother-in-law said coldly. Sarah's dream of a happy marriage was quickly dissolving, but she felt trapped. She had no idea how far things would go, or how she would survive this torment. Sarah's days quickly became a blur of cleaning, cooking, and managing the household. The small allowance her mother-in-law offered, $300 per month, was hardly enough to cover anything beyond her basic needs. She felt like a maid, not a daughter-in-law. While Sarah hoped Andrew would step in and support her, his passive nature left her feeling abandoned. He always took his mother's side, leaving Sarah alone in her misery. Day after day, Sarah would scrub every corner of the house, trying to meet Emily's impossible standards. Every evening, Emily would inspect Sarah's work, always finding some reason to criticize her. "You missed a spot here," Emily would say with a cruel smile. "What have you been doing all day?" Sarah felt her self-worth crumble under the weight of her mother-in-law's constant disapproval. One day, after Emily found dust in a corner of the living room, she decided to take her punishment a step further. "You need to be disciplined," Emily said, her voice cold. She dragged Sarah to the garden shed, locked her inside, and left her there for hours. Sarah had always struggled with claustrophobia, and the dark, confined space caused her to panic. Trembling and gasping for air, she thought she might pass out. This wasn't just mistreatment, it was abuse, and Sarah knew something had to change. But how could she escape, when even her husband wouldn't stand up for her? That night, when Andrew returned home, Sarah hoped he would unlock the shed and free her. But when he finally appeared, he only looked at her from the second-floor window. "Andrew, please let me out," Sarah cried, desperate for his help. But instead of coming to her rescue, Andrew said, "You need to be a better wife. This is your fault." His words cut deeper than anything her mother-in-law had ever said. He was supposed to be her partner, her support, but instead, he was just another source of pain. Sarah couldn't believe how far he had fallen under his mother's control. After hours of waiting in the cold, Sarah was finally let out by her father-in-law, William. He apologized for not being able to help sooner, but Sarah could see that he too was under Emily's control. "I don't have much say in this house," he said softly as he led her inside. It was a small comfort, but at least someone in this family saw her suffering. He gave her a blanket and allowed her to sleep on the couch, but even that small act of kindness had to be done in secret. Emily couldn't know, or William would face her wrath as well. Exhausted and emotionally drained, Sarah fell asleep on the couch, knowing that nothing would change unless she found a way to take control of her life. The next morning, Emily's attitude was as cruel as ever. "Have you learned your lesson?" she asked, her tone dripping with disdain. Sarah nodded silently, her mind racing with thoughts of escape. She couldn't live like this anymore, locked in a cycle of abuse with no end in sight. Emily continued to punish her by withholding the small allowance Sarah had come to rely on. "You're not getting a cent from me for the next year," Emily sneered. "Maybe then you'll learn to do your job properly." Sarah's heart sank further, but she was determined not to let Emily break her. As the days passed, Sarah began to quietly gather evidence of the abuse. She recorded conversations with her mother-in-law and Andrew, hoping that one day she could use these recordings to free herself. But until then, she had to play the part of the obedient wife and daughter-in-law. She followed Emily's every command, working from morning until night, trying to avoid any mistakes that would lead to more punishment. But no matter how hard she worked, it was never enough. Emily always found something to criticize, and Andrew never came to her defense. Sarah began to lose hope that things would ever change. She felt trapped, powerless, and completely alone in a house where she was treated like a servant. But despite the overwhelming despair, a small part of her refused to give up. One evening, after another grueling day of work, Sarah overheard a conversation between Andrew and his mother. "She's useless," Emily said, her voice filled with contempt. "Our family is miserable because of her." Andrew, who had once professed his love for Sarah, agreed without hesitation. "I wish I had married someone else," he said coldly. Sarah's heart shattered in that moment. All the love she had once felt for Andrew was gone, replaced by a deep sense of betrayal. How could he say such things about her? She had given up everything for him, and this was how he repaid her. Sarah decided then and there that she couldn't stay in this house any longer. She had endured months of emotional and psychological abuse, but this was the final straw. That night, while the rest of the house was asleep, Sarah quietly packed a bag. She had no clear plan, but she knew she had to leave before things got worse. She slipped out the front door, her heart pounding in her chest, and ran to the nearest taxi stand. As the taxi sped towards her parents' house, Sarah felt a mixture of fear and relief. She didn't know what her next step would be, but for the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of hope. She was finally taking control of her life. When Sarah arrived at her parents' house, they were shocked to see her standing at the door, still wearing the maid's uniform her mother-in-law had forced her to wear. "What happened?" her mother asked, her voice filled with concern. Sarah hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to begin. But as soon as she started talking, the words came pouring out. She told them everything: the abuse, the isolation, the way Andrew and his mother had treated her like a servant. Her parents listened in stunned silence, their faces growing more horrified with each passing moment. When Sarah finished, her father stood up and said firmly, "We're going to their house. This will not stand." Sarah wasn't sure what her father had planned, but she knew she couldn't go back there. "Dad, I don't want to go back," she said, her voice trembling. "I just want to be free." Her father nodded, understanding the fear in her voice. "You won't have to go back," he assured her. "We'll handle this." The next day, Sarah's parents accompanied her back to the house to confront Emily and Andrew. They had no idea how Emily would react, but Sarah felt a sense of strength having her parents by her side. She had finally taken the first step towards breaking free from the nightmare she had been living in. When they arrived at the house, Emily greeted them at the door with a forced smile. "Oh, it was just a misunderstanding," she said, trying to downplay the situation. But Sarah's father wasn't having it. "This is no misunderstanding," he said sternly. "You have treated my daughter like a servant, and that stops now." Emily's smile faltered, but she quickly recovered, trying to charm her way out of the confrontation. "Come inside, let's talk about this," she said, waving them into the living room. Sarah felt her stomach churn as she stepped back into the house that had caused her so much pain. Andrew was sitting on the couch, looking uncomfortable but saying nothing. Her father wasted no time in getting to the point. "We're here to discuss the terms of Sarah's departure," he said. "She will no longer be living here, and we expect compensation for the way she has been treated." Emily's face turned red with anger. "Compensation?" she scoffed. "For what? She didn't do her job properly." Sarah's mother, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "We have recordings of the abuse," she said calmly. "If you don't want this to go public, I suggest you cooperate." Emily's eyes widened in shock. She had underestimated Sarah and her family, and now she was backed into a corner. Andrew finally spoke up, his voice shaky. "I didn't know she was recording us," he said, looking nervously at his mother. But Emily wasn't ready to give up control just yet. "You're not getting a cent from us," she snapped. "This is our house, and Sarah is part of this family whether she likes it or not." Sarah's father remained calm, but his eyes were cold. "Actually," he said, pulling out a set of documents, "this house belongs to us." Emily and Andrew both stared at him in disbelief. "What are you talking about?" Emily demanded, her voice rising in pitch. Sarah's father handed her the papers. "We own this house," he said firmly. "We rented it to you under the assumption that you would treat Sarah with respect, but clearly that has not happened. You have 1 month to move out." The color drained from Emily's face as she realized the gravity of the situation. She had no power here. Andrew looked at Sarah, his expression one of shock and confusion. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked quietly. Sarah didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Her father had taken control of the situation, and now all she had to do was watch as Emily's carefully constructed world crumbled around her. Emily's pleas for forgiveness fell on deaf ears. "We're sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "We'll treat Sarah better from now on. Please don't make us leave." But Sarah's father was unmoved. "You've had your chance," he said firmly. "This ends now." As they prepared to leave, Emily continued to beg, but Sarah knew it was all an act. She had seen the real Emily, the cruel, manipulative woman who had made her life a living hell for months. There was no going back. As they walked out the door, Sarah felt a sense of closure. She had finally escaped the nightmare. But as they reached the car, her father turned to her and said, "You'll need to file for divorce." The word hit Sarah like a ton of bricks. Divorce. It wasn't something she had ever wanted, but she knew it was the only way to truly break free from Andrew and his toxic family. Over the next few weeks, Sarah met with a lawyer and began the process of ending her marriage. It wasn't easy, but she knew it was the right decision. Andrew tried to apologize several times, but Sarah didn't want to hear it. The love she had once felt for him was gone, and there was no way to repair the damage that had been done. As the divorce proceedings moved forward, Sarah felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. She was no longer bound to a family that had treated her so cruelly. Her parents supported her every step of the way, reminding her that she deserved better. Sarah found a small apartment near her parents' house and began to rebuild her life. It wasn't easy, but she was determined to create a future for herself that was free from the pain and control of her in-laws. She found a job at a local cafe and quickly became friends with the other employees. For the first time in months, she felt a sense of peace. She was finally in control of her own life, and it felt liberating. She didn't have to answer to anyone but herself, and that freedom was something she had longed for during her time with Andrew. Sarah knew it would take time to heal from the emotional scars, but she was confident that she could move forward and find happiness again. Despite everything she had been through, Sarah still believed in love. She hadn't given up on the idea of finding a partner who would treat her with the respect and kindness she deserved. But this time, she would be careful. She wouldn't let herself be blinded by love or allow anyone to take advantage of her again. As the months passed, Sarah continued to focus on herself and her own happiness. She took up new hobbies, reconnected with old friends, and slowly began to rebuild her self-confidence. She knew that healing would be a long process, but she was willing to take it one day at a time. She had learned the hard way that life doesn't always turn out the way you expect, but she also knew that she had the strength to overcome even the darkest of times. And while her marriage to Andrew had ended in pain, it had also taught her valuable lessons about herself and what she wanted in life. In the end, Sarah's journey wasn't just about escaping a toxic marriage, it was about reclaiming her own sense of worth. She had allowed herself to be controlled and mistreated for far too long, but now she was free. Free to live her life on her own terms, free to pursue her own dreams, and free to find happiness again. She had been through hell, but she had come out the other side stronger and more determined than ever. And while she still had moments of doubt and fear, she knew that she was no longer the scared, isolated woman who had once been locked in a garden shed by her mother-in-law. She was Sarah, a survivor, and her story